Welcome back. Today's sketchbook spread is my Syngonium Podophyllum Berry Illusion cultivar. If you don't already know, I'm on a mission to illustrate every single houseplant I own. I got really into houseplants when the pandemic started in 2020, and my collection started to grow, and I needed a way to keep track of the care and the growth of my plants. So I started out by trying an app, and the app wasn't really working for me. It was taking a lot of time to fill in all the information, and a lot of it was manually inputted, and I just wasn't finding an app that worked for me for tracking this. So I realized I could be drawing all of my plants, and I have never ever, full disclosure, I have never completed a sketchbook in my life. So I was like, this is a perfect time. I'm stuck at home anyway. I might as well start a sketchbook since I have so many laying around that are just staring at me, all untouched. You know, maybe I should start this project. So I started the project at the end of December of 2020. Previous to this plant, I have illustrated 25 other plants. I didn't record videos of those. I didn't think there would be enough interest in the project. I've had one or two people ask me for videos for the process, so here I am. If you'd like to see my previous sketchbook spreads, you can check out my Instagram at Jennifer Walsh Design. You will find them all documented there. Also in the future, I will be releasing a sketchbook tour video, probably when I hit the halfway mark in this particular sketchbook. Speaking of which, this sketchbook is the Strathmore 400 series, gray toned paper, and it's the hardcover version. It takes ink and colored pencil and wax crayons really well, wax pastels. I don't have any complaints, and I think the blending of using white ink and dark gray ink and the colored pencil looks really nice on the gray paper. So to start out, I always start with just a sketch. I'm trying to get looser, as I'm sure many other artists can relate. I tend to be a perfectionist, and if something's not exactly as the reference picture, I have trouble accepting that it's good or finished. So I'm really trying to get looser with my line work and not worry so much about being 100% accurate. It's not like somebody's gonna come along, grab my sketchbook and compare it to the plant. And even if they did, the plant would have changed by then. So, I mean, who's gonna do that? But I started out with just a sketch, and for this particular project, since this plant is a fairly complicated plant as far as the foliage goes, it's got a lot of little splotches, little spots, a lot of veins, and since that really is the main character of the leaf, I didn't want to do the full plant in full color. So anything that I'm doing that I'm going to be inking, I do with mechanical pencil. And so for the overall view of the plant, which is a top-down view, I took reference photos of this plant, and I'm working from my own images. So for anything that's going to be inked, which this entire overhead view of the plant will be inked, I just do in this mechanical pencil. It's a root ring pencil with 0.5 size lead. Here's the line work. I'm working on it. I've got this sped up about 600%. Overall, I think the line work on this went pretty well. And as far as this plant goes, I got this plant back in, I believe it was September of 2020. It was my first online order for plants. I didn't really feel comfortable. I still don't really feel comfortable going out in public. I've been home most of the time. So I ordered this online with some other plants that I ordered. I got this from Gabriella Plants. I highly recommend them. They offer winter insurance for shipping, and they pack the plants really well. All of the plants showed up very healthy and very safely. But this particular plant, Syngonium Podophyllum, it's also called an arrowhead plant or arrowhead vine. This particular cultivar doesn't really vine, it's more smaller and compact. And this cultivar, the Berry Illusion cultivar, also should have more of a pink undertone than what you're gonna see in this video, but I ended up getting some scorching on the leaves because I had it directly in the window, because, you know, a plant loves lights, put it directly in the light. And I'm in Texas, so the sun here can get pretty intense even in September. So I noticed after just a week of it being like in the windowsill, it was in a north facing window. So it wasn't like getting blasted with, it wasn't like it was in a south facing window where it was getting blasted with light. It you know, it was getting a fair amount though, and so I noticed it was scorching a bit on the leaves. So I moved it, and I ended up moving it initially about 2 to 3 feet away from the window, but then I needed that space for other things, so I ended up moving the plant again. So now it's about 4 to 5 feet away from the window, and unfortunately, with these kind of cultivars that especially have the pink undertones, which this one should have, which it did when I first got it, they've slowly started to fade. Some of the older leaves still has it in the veins and just kind of near the central part of the leaf. That will fade if it doesn't get quite enough light. So if I moved it closer to the window, that would come back in full force. But just at this moment, it's thriving where it is, minus the lack of vibrancy in the undertones, which doesn't bother me in particular. I'll probably experiment this spring, this growing season, by moving it around. But this particular plant does need, if you get the lighter versions of this plant, you do need to give it more light. Just again, keep it out of direct sunlight if you want to keep those same colors. This plant is a fairly thirsty plant, I would say. When I got it was pretty thirsty in winter. You know, it was growing slower, so it wasn't putting out a whole lot of new growth, which is fine. It's winter, that's to be expected. Now it's spring again, and it has started growing like crazy. It is recommended to fertilize it about once a month with like a half-strength, slow-release fertilizer. About 4 weeks ago, I put in one of those little Miracle-Gro slow-release little blue like rod looking things, and you just poke a hole in the dirt and shove it down in there. I did add that, and it has been growing. It's got like 3 or 4 new leaves coming out on it right now. So that is, I would agree with that advice. I'll probably hit it with a little bit more fertilizer in another couple weeks, since the particular fertilizer I put is slow release over 4 to 6 weeks. So I'll wait till that kind of runs out before adding more. It is a fairly thirsty plant though. What I do is I stick my finger down into the dirt 1 to 2 inches, and if it's dry, I give it some water. Now, full disclosure, the pot does not have a drainage hole, and I always just err on the side of caution and just underwater rather than overwater, just because I don't want it sitting in its water and I don't want the roots to get rot. But if you have proper drainage in your pots, which you should have, I recommend that. Definitely, saturate it once or twice a week when the dirt starts to get really dry at the top. Don't let it fully dry out. I don't think it particularly likes that. It kind of gets a little droopy. And I water during the growing season maybe twice a week. Sometimes it averages out to 1.5 times a week. It just kind of depends. I just use the finger test. I poke it and see how it's doing. So for this section, you'll notice I switched from the mechanical pencil to the Kohl erasable colored pencil in green. So what I typically do, if whichever part I'm going to be actually doing full color, I will outline in the appropriate color erasable colored pencil for the sketch instead. For this plant, it works fine because all the veins are a little bit darker and the outer edge of the leaf is also fairly dark, so it works in this instance. I typically line it with this and then go back and erase, but not like 100% fully, like 80% of it away. So I still can see the lines, but it's not overbearing or hard to cover up if I need to with the colored pencil when I get to that point. So now that the sketching part is finished, I'm just switching over to using my Pilot Metro fountain pen with medium nib and the J. Herbin 1670 anniversary ink in the color Stormy Gray. It's a beautiful ink. It's like a darkish gray with gold flecks in it. The flecks aren't heavily apparent in this particular portion of the sketch, so I just line all of the sketching I've done. I really like this part. You don't have to think a whole lot. You just kind of draw over the lines you've already done. And then after I'm done with that, I always go back and, after it dries fully, erase all the pencil, and the line work is done. Relatively relaxing and easy process. So back to the subject of the plant itself, the Syngonium. This plant does like a little bit of humidity. This plant is native to Latin America and has actually been naturalized in this state, and so it can handle Texas to some extent. So it does like a bit of humidity. Our house is currently at about 50% humidity, which isn't ideal for all of my plants, but this plant, it's fine. It likes 40 to 50% humidity, but prefers it a little bit higher, maybe 60%. But again, it's been doing just fine, putting out fresh growth and no crispy leaves, minus the little bit of sun-scorched bit on 1 or 2 leaves. This plant is really easy to take care of. I haven't had any major issues, no pest issues with this plant. It seems really healthy. I haven't propagated from it, but I hear that is easy to do. The internet says that you can just, you know, root it from a cutting and it roots really easily. I think you just need to make sure that there is a node when you root it, and it shouldn't be a problem at all. I might experiment with that later. One thing to note about this plant though is that it is extremely toxic. Don't eat it. Don't, if you have kids, young children that potentially could get into it, or you have pets, cats or dogs that like to munch on plants, it's toxic. Dude, you know, keep it out of reach or don't get this plant. As for the growing temperature, during winter, it's not recommended to get below 60 degrees if you want it to remain healthy and somewhat active in the growing. During growing season, you really don't want to go below 68 degrees, and it can handle about up to 86 to 87 degrees Fahrenheit. So for example, I'm in Texas, so this is not a plant I would put outside during the peak of summer. Right now would be okay because it's spring and the temps don't really, well, occasionally they get above 90, but lately it's been fairly nice and not getting really above 85 to 87. But typically it's a house plant, and any basic room temp would be absolutely fine for this. Avoid drafts or being right in front of a air vent of some sort. You don't want to hit it with a bunch of random different temperature changes. It's not going to be a fan of that. This plant also has a bunch of different cultivars available, a lot of interesting ones. You can get some that are almost solid pink. There's yellow ones, there's ones that are mostly white. You can just find so many different color variations of this plant. So I'm sure you can find something that you like if you're kind of on the fence on if you need one. I just think they're a really cool looking plant, easy to take care of. It's a great starter plant, and they come in so many fun colors and variations. Plus it grows really fast. It's very satisfying to see how big it's gotten in just a couple months, and most of that time was in winter, so it still put out growth during winter, albeit a bit slower. I'm just using a giant brush you can get from like the hardware store. It's a soft bristled brush. Just using it to quickly wipe away all the eraser bits left over after erasing all the line work. I'm gonna move on to the colored pencils now, which you're gonna notice the lighting is getting darker. We had some storms roll in while filming this, so apologies for the footage getting a bit grainier and a little bit darker. I'm working with natural light. I'm in front of a large window. I just like the look of natural light better, and I didn't feel like breaking out my actual video lights, so here we are. So now I've switched to Prismacolor color pencils. These are the Premier range. I really like these. They blend really nicely and get some really great color out of it. So for the actual colors I'm using, for this first one, it's dark green. It's a marine green, PC 988, and I'm just using that to quickly go over the lines, the veins, and the outer edge, and then going back to do some light shading just to get basic placement for where the shadows are, where the darker kind of splotches are on the leaf. Now this leaf is a pretty lightly colored leaf overall. The shadows aren't super dark on it, not a whole lot of dark splotches. The dark splotches are just mainly little dotted areas. So I just start out with the dark green, and then I'm going back over it with this really pale green. This is a pale sage, PC 1089. This one blends really well. It's a really soft pigmented pencil. It's a lovely pencil to work with. And I'm just going over the top, pretty much over the whole thing. The veins are actually a little bit lighter than what that marine green was. Plus you just get this nice depth when you keep layering. So I'm not pressing really hard with any of these pencils. Fairly light touch with most of them. And as you see, I just go over the whole thing with this light pale sage. And then I'll come back with the dark marine green again. And I'm just starting out by hitting like the edges where I know there's dark and a bit of texture, and the leaf has this really interesting like speckledy effect kind of on the edges. It's almost like the veins are trying to form there, but they're just really end up being super close together and just look kind of splotchy. I'm just going over this whole section again and hitting where it needs it, like extra dark, extra shadows. It's just a matter of layering, taking my time, and this is like the first time that I've had to do like a bunch of little dots with the colored pencils. I mean, it worked just fine. I'm still just working, adding more shadows. There's a couple of dark, kind of splotchy undertones throughout this leaf. And you see like a lot of it's concentrated towards the center of the veined areas. And just building the layers. And this is a kind of arduous process. But it always surprises me. It never quite takes as long as I'm afraid it's going to. And still, again, I'm only using harder pressure on the places that I know are going to be super dark, which is the edges. The edges of the leaves, all the little dots that I'm adding. Those I try to push down a little harder. The area is kind of in the center. I'm doing really light, and I'm using the circular motion because I've found that if you just do back and forth and just lines, it's harder to blend. It doesn't blend as nicely when you layer on top. But if you use circular motions, it kind of seems to spread it out, and it's not quite so harsh. Still adding kind of the splotchiness. There's some faint splotchy undertones, which to me was really interesting to try to capture, but they always appear a little darker. Ultimately, it's going to tone down because I'm going to come back with the lighter pale sage again. It's just a lot of fun texture on this plant in general, which again, that's why I opted not to do the full plant illustration in full color, which I love doing, and I have done it on a few other plants, but this one would have just taken so long because of the detail in the leaves, and I just know how I am. I would have wanted to do every single bit of it. It would have taken ages. But now I'm coming back and going back in with the pale sage to soften up the splotchy bits and blend it. And at this point I'm starting to press a little harder because I'm getting to the more of the final stages of the overall coloring process, and it's going to be mainly blending this out, going back and forth to get the splotchiness right. So I'll start switching between the pale sage and the marine green a bit more here. Pressing harder, getting the blending right. Still being chased with the pressure on the marine green though, because again, this is a very lightly colored leaf overall. So I don't want to be too heavy-handed with the dark green, marine green. And now I'm getting to the point where the overall base color is pretty good, so I'm going to start going back in with this marine green. I've got it sharpened pretty well because I need the point. I need some really fine lines here, and I'm going back and adding all these little bitty veins that I didn't include in the original sketch because it would have just taken too long, and honestly they were so delicate. There's no point until, to add them until the end, and that's what I'm doing. I'm going back and adding all these smaller, fainter veins that are running between all these bigger vein sections. And these are all relatively light and thin, delicate. And I think this is really where you start to see the character of the leaf itself. And it's so intricate. And it's just fun taking a really close look at these plants as I'm drawing them and illustrating them. Trying to recreate them. And as you can see, it's getting much darker. Dark storm clouds have started rolling in at this point. We were about to have a hailstorm come in from this. We had a ½ inch to 1 inch plus sized hail. Luckily our cars were fine. No windows were busted or anything like that. Which we got lucky. I heard other places in the neighborhood the vehicles didn't fare quite so well. I'm trying to go relatively quickly, but still trying to get the basic idea of the leaf. And honestly, as I go with this, some of them kind of fudge a little, but that's okay. I get the idea of the basic texture of the leaf, how the veins are kind of forming. And they're still relatively close to how they are on the actual leaf, but there's so many of these little bitty veins at the edge of the leaf and blending into like all the little dots that kind of seem to form the edge. This plant just has a lot of great texture to it. And now I'm finally getting to where I'm adding all the little bitty dots that kind of spread out from the edges and spread through some of the splotchiness in the center of the bit larger veined areas. Lots and lots of little dots. But it just adds so much texture to just add all these. It takes time, but I think it was worth it. And these storm clouds just rolling in, but I was bound and determined to finish it because at this point it kept getting interrupted. And it took me 3 days to actually film all of this. And I was at the last stretch and I'm like, I'm not stopping. I'm gonna finish this. Had a lot of work this week, so it was tough to find the time to get to spend on this. And now I'm coming in with another Premier Colored pencil. This one is the Gray Green Light PC 289. Another color that layers really well, and I love using it. I use this one a lot for highlights and last touches on a lot of the leaves. It's just a really, really pale green, almost white, and it's a really soft pigment, so it really layers and blends really well, even when it seems like you've hit the point of no return as far as putting too much pigment on the page. Now the fully developed leaf is wrapped up. Now I'm switching over to the little leaf that's a new baby leaf, probably a couple days away from starting to unfurl. It's a leaf that's starting to unfurl. You see the edge kind of starting to unwrap a little bit. But I like to include the different stages of the leaves if I have the reference pictures for it. And luckily this plant already had a bunch of new leaves growing on it, and you can actually see, you could tell from the overall line drawing which leaves I picked out for this and used as the reference photos. You can see the little unfurled one, or the one trying to unfurl. New baby leaf there in the line, and there it is in full color, which I think is neat. Surprised by how quickly I got this part colored. I think it turned out really well. It really popped from the page, all in all, when it was finished. And here I am again. It's all the same colors. It's the same pale sage, marine green, and gray green light pencils. And I love the part here at the end where I'm going in and adding all the little veins on it. I think it just really helped the whole thing come together. Going back in and adding some more highlights with that gray green light pencil. And as usual, I always come in, since my handwriting is absolutely atrocious, I did experiment with handwriting some of the plant names, but I hated it, so now I just use these little alphabet school letter stamps, and I really love how it looks. So I just go through and stamp the scientific name of it. And now I'm writing. I like to label on occasion the illustrations, but I'm using the same pen again. It's the Pilot Metro fountain pen with the J. Herbin Stormy Gray anniversary ink, 1670 anniversary ink. I just always fall back to using this pen. And I like to write the basic care instructions, information that I've already talked about in this video about the humidity and watering and lighting conditions and ideal temperature range and things like that, just so I have record of it. And then I go to, like, I believe this text is from Wikipedia, and I just use a white Jelly Roll gel pen, and I find that it has really good opacity. This is the 0.05 size, I believe. I didn't mind the 0.08. I used to use that on a lot of the spreads, but because that's what I had. But I picked this up and I'm really liking the little bit of a thinner. I feel like it's not quite so prominent on the page. I like the finer tip. It's more of an accent rather than a distraction from the illustrations on the page. But I just go through it. I think I copied all this text from Wikipedia. It's just talking about where it was originally native to, Latin America, where it's now naturalized to. It's spread quite a bit into south of the United States. I just like adding all this text, and I try to fit it around the illustration. And I mean, I can always do it better, and some of it's a little crooked, but that's okay. It adds character. And I think the text really helps the illustrations pop, especially when it's in such a light color on this gray paper. And here's the finished illustration. I think the sketchbook spread turned out really well. I'm not sure what the next plant will be yet, but if you'd like to see more, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you'd like. You can follow me on Instagram at Jennifer Walsh Design. There I've got all my other sketchbook illustrations. Thanks for taking the time to watch. I hope you enjoyed it, or if you just like plants, I hope this was somewhat informative. Thanks for watching.